Hey everybody, welcome to today's live. We're going to talk about copyrights, unpublished versus published, and the impact they can have on your business and your creative works. So, if you don't know what a copyright is, a copyright basically is a way to protect your creative work. You get a copyright automatically when you create something. It implies ownership. However, in order to have some type of legal recourse or to be able to give others notice, you need to actually file your copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office. Now, when you file your copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office, there are different types of different kinds of copyright. There are published and unpublished. And today I kind of want to go through that really briefly, published versus unpublished, and why you should copyright your stuff earlier or sooner rather than later. Now, there are quite a few things to unpack when it comes to copyright. So I may mention things or talk about things that I haven't covered yet, but we will get to it in upcoming live. But today we're just going to kind of discuss the difference between published and unpublished. If you see me glancing down, it's just because I like to take notes and I like to make sure that I'm staying on track, right? And some of these definitions are a little formal, if you want to say. So I just like to make sure that I'm quoting the law. Okay, so let's start. So, published versus unpublished. The Copyright Office defines publications as the distribution of copies or phonic records of works to the public by sale or other transfer of ownership, or by rental, lease, or lending. The offering to distribute copies or phonographs to a group of persons for purposes of further distribution, public performance, or public display constitutes publication. A public performance, ooh, this is a mouthful, ain't it? A public performance or display of a work does not itself constitute publication. Huh? So what does that even mean? Cha, I don't even know. It's like, nah, I do know. Okay, so basically what the Copyright Office is saying is that in order for something to be or appear to be published versus unpublished, these are the factors that they're looking at. This is the definition that they're using. Now, I want to be really clear. The trickiness about copyrights is that a lot of it is it depends, right? There's an exception to almost every rule. Everything is not just black and white. And with the rise of the internet, it has become trickier and trickier in regards to publication. So, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to walk you through some scenarios of published versus unpublished so you can get a better idea. So, number one, you want to file as much as possible normally for unpublished for several reasons. Number one, it's better to file your copyright while your stuff is unpublished because it allows you to have immediate statutory legal recourse. So what does that mean? That means if someone copies your work, even if they don't make a profit, there is a set price, right? A statutory price that is set for each um, infringement that is found. Okay. And so that's really fantastic because it also allows you to not have to, it gives you more leverage, right? Like if you find someone is copying your stuff and they take your things, then you are able to sue them and get things at a certain point. So the starting price for each infringement is 250. So if someone, for example, takes your poem that you have copyrighted already, and it was on copyright unpublished. So once you published it, it was available, it was protectable. Then every single, say they printed it in 100 books, so all 100 of those books is considered one infringement. And so say the judge says, okay, we're going to give you $200, so that means you get $200 for each infringement. A lot of times it might not even get to that point, right? Because if it's a clear copy, then it's just a matter of negotiation. So that's the power of getting your things copyrighted before you get it unpublished. The second thing is it provides notice to the public that this is a work of art, right? So when you copyright for common law copyright, you don't have any legal recourse. And the courts often say that someone can say, oops, I just didn't know. But if you file it with the US Copyright Office, it provides notice to other parties automatically, even if they didn't know, right? Even if they didn't know. So that is why you want unpublished. Now, if you do publish, your timeline kind of shrinks, right? So if ugh, man, I got the blah blah today. So if something is published, you only have 3 months from the time that it's published to file for the copyright in order to maybe shut down infringers. So what do I mean? When you file your copyright and it's unpublished, then anyone who infringes on it, basically, you have the right to sue them or get legal recourse. When something is published in copyright, you only can sue infringers upon the filing of the copyright, unless you file your copyright within 3 months of publishing the work. So, what does that look like? Let's go back to the poem. So say the poem, we printed our book and we have our poem or our books of poems, and we print it in March 2020. And for whatever reason, we didn't talk to J. Bull Consulting and we didn't copyright the book. But then we see one of our amazing videos and we're like, oh my gosh, I need to copyright my book. Now, looking at the clock, it's June. So March, April, May, June, it's been 3 months. So they decide they're going to copyright their book in June. Well, lo and behold, once they copyright their book in June, they find out that someone has copied their book back in April, right? Back in April. Well, the 3 month gap period has passed now. So you're not able to sue those people for that copyright, right? Because you did not actually have a copyright for your published work. And that is the power of making sure you copyright unpublished versus published. It's the recourse, it's the leverage for me, right? That is what makes it more powerful. So the trickiness that I want to go through is why there is such a discourse in my community, right? What is published versus unpublished? So published versus unpublished can be selective and it can be super clear. For books, published is usually going to be you printed it, you're putting it on Amazon, you're distributing it, that's published. But it can be trickier when you're talking about perhaps posting on social media, right? That's what everyone wants to know. If I post something on social media, is it published? And the honest answer is it depends. And I'm not saying it depends because I'm being facetious or I'm being evasive. Literally, the copyright office says it depends. It really depends on how the author is presenting it. There is some legal reasoning that says even if you post your blogs, they're not considered published because basically all you're doing is reading them. But then if you monetize the blog, then it is considered published because you're making some type of money on it. Same thing as if you make a painting and you have your painting and it's in a gallery and you have a citing for it. But is that considered published? Copyright law says most likely not. But if you sell prints of that painting or you're selling that painting, then it can be considered public. A lot of it kind of turns on whether or not it's being created for distribution. So if something's being created for distribution, meaning it's being created to be consumed, created for someone to take hold of, then that can be considered published. So this is where it gets tricky because you're talking about performance arts, right? So if you perform a song, is it considered published? Is it published when you perform it? Is it published when you put it on YouTube? Is it published, right, when you wrote down the song? When is it considered published for copyright purposes? So you can't think about published in the same sense of like, oh, I published something and it's out in the world. You have to think about it in a more of a legal term. And that's where it gets kind of tricky. And that's why I said it depends. So one song could be considered published because of the way that the artist went about it, and other songs couldn't be, maybe not published. Also, the author may feel like they have more benefits filing their copyright as unpublished versus published, so they're going to argue and say it was unpublished. This is why it's so important that if you think you have creative works, if you think you have things that are designs and words and authors, then you have to get these things copyrighted sooner rather than later, because that published versus unpublished can really come and bite you. We did a video a while ago talking about B. Simone, and she was discussing, the blogs and the different planners that she had basically stolen from other authors online. Now, what was travesty about this entire situation is that none of those authors or writers seem to have had copyrights. And what's even worse is if they didn't have copyrights, if they argue, for example, if they tried to sue B. Simone, their greatest argument for B. Simone's party or attorneys is that their works are published and they failed to copyright it within the 3 month time of the work being published. Therefore, they cannot have statutory money. Now, that's not to say that they can't get any money, right? Like if somebody's stealing your stuff, there is a possibility, but the statutory is out, which means they have to prove harm. They have to prove that by B. Simone stealing or taking that work, that she intentionally caused them harm and it affected their bottom line. So you have to show harm. Whereas before, all you had to do is show that someone was copying you, which is a much lower standard and way easier, right? Like you look at it, you're like, you're copying me. Like it's clear. It wasn't an issue of whether or not they were copying. They were copying. And if they had their stuff copyrighted, it wouldn't have even been an issue. B. Simone would have been paying them money for every infringement of their copyright. Okay, so when you're thinking about whether or not you want to copyright, always consider published versus unpublished. If you're unsure, you want to contact an attorney, or you can always try to Google it and see it for yourself. Like I said, every situation is different because the internet has made it very difficult to always understand what something is published versus unpublished. And if you're in that gray area, you can always pull something in our group and we can talk about it more. I'm going to keep talking about copyrights because I think they're really important when it comes to your intellectual property in conjunction and using them with your trademarks. So if you have any questions or you want us to cover certain things for this little series that we're doing, please comment below.